Coogs House. The Houston Cougars rode a dominant defensive performance on the way to a fourth straight win on Saturday. But how dominant was that defense Saturday morning?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to stop by, and I think we're getting more and more of those, be sure to hit subscribe, download. That way you can listen on Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you found us on YouTube, welcome back. It is so good to see you again on the YouTube channel. Hit subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. We're doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers. The next one is at 2,000. That's the next big marker. So hit subscribe. Let's get there. Like and comment on the videos. Let us know you are in the contest. Now, today's episode is going to be all about Saturday in college basketball, specifically in regards to the Houston Cougars and that great defensive performance as Houston knocks off Kansas State. Talking some about the game and the defense itself in that one. We're going to talk some in a moment about the second segment about the veteran leadership that led to that win. Some interesting words for them as well. And then third and final segment is going to be looking at the rest of the Big 12 on Saturday because of how that pertains to Houston and where Houston stands in the best conference. That is the Big 12. The best conference in college basketball is the Big 12. But first, let's recap that ball game a little bit. Houston knocks off Kansas State at home 74-52. Houston improves to 18-2. Kansas State falls to 14-6. The game tipped off at 11 a.m., so if I refer to it as Saturday morning, that's obviously why, because I guess technically half the game happened after noon, but it felt like a very morning, early rise kind of game. And frankly, Houston open up the game ready to go, and Kansas State looked like they were still sleeping or a little bit jet lagged or something, because Houston opened up a 11-point lead, 11-0 really early on. Kansas State went 6 minutes without scoring, and frankly, Houston only built upon that lead over the course of the game. Houston's defense was phenomenal, unbelievable. Any other superlative you want to put on that? I mean, Houston's defense looked tremendous in this one. We're going to talk more about that in a second, but quickly, as far as box score kind of stuff goes, Houston had several guys show off big time in the box score. Most notably, Jamal Shead with 17 points. Had a couple big shots in that one. Jawan Roberts had 14. Damian Dunn came off the bench and had 13 points. A total of 9 Cougs scored in this one. And I am giving Ramon Walker his one free throw as scoring, although that 1 point I guess you could talk about. Javier Francis managed to go this entire game and have a major defensive impact at the rim, deterring shots, deferring shots, pulling in some important rebounds on his skying for 8 rebounds. Had just 2 points and not attempt a field goal. I think it was the most impact I've ever seen a guy have in a game that did not attempt a field goal. As much as I want to talk about Houston's offense, because I'm kind of an offensive junkie, I love X and O's. The truth is, the thing that stuck out in this game was the defensive effort. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, that Kelvin Sampson's teams are always strong defensively. But this one, I think, stuck out for a number of reasons. So first, let's talk about coming into this game. Kansas State shot 43.9% from the field, 52.6% from 2 coming into this game. Coming into this game, Kansas State had 38.5 rebounds per game, averaging just 14.8 turnovers. They're averaging 74.1 points per game coming into this game. Coming into this game, they had 3 guys averaging over 14.5 points per game. They were only giving up, for what's worth, Kansas State had only been giving up 67.8 points per game, and they were turning their opponent over at 13.1 times per game. In the Kansas State-Houston game on Saturday, Kansas State shot 40% overall. That's almost 4% lower than their average. They shot 46.2% from 2. That's a full 6 percentage points lower than their average. They had 23 rebounds in this game, Kansas State did. That is a notable 15.5 rebounds less than their average per game. They had 16 turnovers, which is about a turnover and a little less than a turnover and a half more than they average. Kansas State scored just 52 points. That is a notable 22 points less than they average. It's a lot. They had just one guy score for 14.5 points. Cam Carter had 16 before fouling out in the second half. For what it's worth, Arthur Kaluma had been averaging like 16 points per game. Houston held him to 11. He was the big guy I was worried about before the game. Clearly, Kelvin Sampson and them had a plan. After only allowing 67.8 points per game coming into this game, they gave up 74 points to Houston, and Kansas State had been turning over opponents 13.1 times per game. Houston only turned it over 7 times. After the game, Jerome Tang was a coach I respect a lot, a guy from Trinidad. He'd been coaching in the high school ranks and around the Houston area up in Cleveland, Texas. And frankly, had kind of worked his way up the college ranks too. Most notably was a lead assistant on that Baylor staff that knocked Houston out in the Final Four and won a national championship a couple years ago. A defensive-minded Baylor team that was, right? Remember that team very specifically. Jerome Tang set up Houston after the game. They may be the best defensive team I've ever seen. He would continue later that their runs were a basket max. They never had runs of multiple baskets. And that's incredibly high praise from a guy that, frankly, has been around a lot of great defensive basketball. He's seen it up close and personal. He's coached it in Waco as an assistant. And frankly, when he got to Kansas State and kind of revitalized that program last year, that was in large part because of the great defensive basketball they played a year ago. Right now, Jerome Tang had a lot of things to say throughout the post-game press conference. I thought it was great to see his honesty about the way he got his technical foul and probably receive a large fine from that from the Big 12 Conference for that on Monday morning. But I honestly don't hate what he had to say. But this isn't a Kansas State show, so I'm not going to give him too much talk on this, too much of the airwaves. But to his point of this being the best defense he's ever seen, Houston is holding opponents to 51.9 points per game. Now, you can say what you want about the rankings and this conference schedule, last conference schedule, but Houston did play 4 quad 1 teams in non-conference, and this is in the Big 12 conference, having played, 8 games in conference play so far. 51.9 points per game is the best in the country, best defense in the country in points per game. St. Mary's is second at 57.5. That gap between 51.9 and 57.5 is bigger between 1 and 2 than the gap between number 2, St. Mary's, and number 10. That's how big a window, that's how big the gap between the second lowest points per game and the lowest points per game that Houston's holding so far. In a similar vein, frankly, a more impressive vein even, if you want to get more analytical defensive efficiency measures opponents' points per 100 possessions. So when you factor in like possessions you play in a game and stuff like that, all just a little bit, Houston's also leading the country in that. Houston has 84.4. So if they played 100 straight possessions, both teams, they'd be holding teams to 84.4 points. Tennessee is number 2 in the country in that at 90.9. That gap between 84.4 and 90.9 between number 1 and number 2 in terms of defensive efficiency is as big as the gap between Tennessee, number 2, and number 35, Richmond. Houston's got these large gulfs between them and the second best defense across a number of different statistical categories. It doesn't look real. When you put them on charts and graphs, College B-Ball Analytics posted some stuff on Twitter this week. I'm still calling it Twitter, sorry, about like where Houston ranks in terms of steal and block rate relative to the rest of the country. It looks like they're not in the same league. It doesn't look comparable. It looks like they must be playing a different sport. Houston's defense, by every statistical measure, is impressive. And after watching on Saturday against Kansas State, I almost think the eye test is more so. Now, I know that's hard to say, but truthfully, Kansas State's a team that's going to win a lot of basketball games in the Big 12 this year. And frankly, Jerome Tang's a very talented basketball coach. And obviously I would put Kelvin Sampson above him, but I don't think the window between those two coaches is 22 points. I think that's just how talented these teams are, right? This team is. And the gap there is just that big a deal. You see the speed and rotation, the helper type stuff. They double team guys coming off of screens, and they rotate and cut off the roller before he even catch the ball. They're picking off the most notable play was an Emmanuel Sharp steal to me, where they double team in the left slot, and then the guard that has the ball thinks he has a roller coming down the lane, and Emmanuel Sharp beats the roller to the ball for a steal because when that double team happened, he was already in the lane. They're just moving on a string all together, and great orchestration. I think a lot of that has to do with the great senior leadership on this team and just how great those veterans are. I want to talk about one or two of those guys in the second segment. But first, Houston has been functioning like a well-oiled machine. And passion, drive, patience are what bring home a winning trophy, but it's also what keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle at a level and level up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride or die every time, or your money back. Because eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive. ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, I mentioned that this is not the Jerome Tang show, and this is not the Kansas State. I don't think we have a Locked On Wildcats. If you got a guy that you think to nominate, let me know. But we did hear more from Jerome Tang after the game. He's a coach that is well respected across college basketball, which I think is an interesting how much respect he has in his second year as a head coach at a major program is impressive. He's warranted it. He's earned it. But in the post game, he's very frank. He's very blunt. And in the post game afterwards, he said, speaking of Jamal Shead, that Jamal makes, quote, everyone around him better. He makes good players look like all conference guys. Now, I mentioned that Tang was the lead assist on that Baylor team that won it all back in 2021. And that team actually played against a technically freshman, Jamal Shead, many, many moons ago, right? And it's interesting to see how these things kind of come full circle. But the growth and development of Jamal Shead, who played on that team with Quentin Grimes and Ladiki. He played with Marcus Sasser. He's playing with LJ Cryer now. You see all these different evolutions of Jamal Shead. And so, like on Saturday, he had 17 points, 3 assists, 2 steals. He holds Tyler Perry, who's getting his own 15-ish points and 6-ish assists for Kansas State, to 3 points and 2 assists, and turned him over once, right? Now, I think you could talk about how those statistics and this and that, like, well, clearly Jamal Shead's holding their starting point guard to this, and he's doing that in his own. That's clearly so talented and good, and that's all true. But it's almost more impressive when you look at like the breakdown of the play-by-play or watch the game live, and it's like, okay, Houston needs a basket here. What do? Okay, Houston needs a stop here. What do? And the answer is always Jamal. It's always Jamal every single time. And it's not that he always necessarily scores the basket, although on Saturday he did, and we'll get that in a second. It's that he's always the one trusted to make the play. During the game, I watch the game on TV. I watch all games on TV because I like being able to reflect and things like that in a calmer environment. And especially I'm trying to analyze things. I appreciate the TV aspect of it, the replays and so on. I say that to say that I also usually mute the game, but when we're on national broadcast, I kind of want to hear what they have to say. And we were on a national broadcast, so I turned on the sound. And the play-by-play guys were commenting in the game that the way that they watched them practice, and they said that the way they saw the practice break down was, honestly, they felt like if Kelvin and Kellen and the rest of the coaching staff, Quanis, Hollis, all of them, want to take a week-long vacation in the middle of the season, that Jamal could run the practice. Jamal could run practice for a week in the middle of the season if the coaching staff wanted to step away for whatever reason. He's that kind of a leader and that kind of vocal at practice. That's what they were talking about as far as running practice, making jokes. But on the floor, what I took that as to mean is that you're watching Jamal Shead being that detailed, that similar to Kelvin, and running the offense on the floor and the defense on the floor in a way that's exactly as Kelvin sees it. And he's that significant of an extension of Kelvin Sampson on the basketball court. Now, I mentioned that you could talk about the plays he's asked to make, right? It's a key part of the game when they typically run a 1-4 pick and roll with he and Jawan with certain spacing to make sure that they have all kinds of options. Sometimes they run a backside action to make sure they occupy defense, depending on who they're playing or who's hot or whatever. And we frankly criticized Houston for at the end of the TCU game knocking the ball back to Jamal. Kelvin was in tears, and he got emotional. I shouldn't say in tears. Emotional at the end of the game, thinking about how do we not get Jamal the ball at the end of that game. But in this game, in a blowout of sorts, even Kansas State had cut the lead to 14, and they cut to 14 on a Arthur Kaluma 3. He's a dangerous basketball player. It looked like he might be getting hot for a second, right? And they come down the floor. They're in a 1-4 high pick and roll. And Jamal Shead runs downhill, gets a layup. Boom. Layup. Okay. Leads back up to 16. They come down. Kansas State makes a tough putback, cuts it to 14 again. Houston comes back down. 1-4 pick and roll. Ball gets back to Jamal. Sets up for 3. Boom. The lead's back to 17. And it almost felt like Kansas State deflated in that instant and that 5 minutes or so into the second half. If they hadn't already, frankly, that was it for Kansas State. They, at that point, seemed to realize anything that they did, anything that they managed to muster up and produce against that dominant Houston defense on their side, Houston was going to come down. They're going to find Jamal, and he's going to get it right back. And the timeliness of those buckets is as important as the buckets themselves, because you can get 17 points a lot of different ways. It's hard to do in college basketball, but you can get 17 points a lot of different ways. To do it at the right gut-punching times that deflate a team, not everyone can do that. There are a lot of dudes, a couple dudes per team in college basketball that can get 17 points per game on that team. There are not a lot of dudes across all of college basketball that can make the timely plays like that when the other team knows that you're trying to be that guy. Now, I should point out that one of the things I also was impressed with Jamal this year, and a lot on Saturday, was that he understands the game flow. He says, okay, you got a hot hand here. We got to run this set to get that guy the ball. Got to run that action to get him the ball, whatever. And there was a moment in this game where no one could cover J1. And J1 is a veteran leader in his own right. He's playing through an injury. You could talk about a lot of different things that he's done in his time as Houston Cougar to earn being a top dog and top billing in this program. I would argue that he is as much as Jamal Shead is like the head of the snake and the heartbeat of this team, the rah, get up and go, the soul, all of those things to me go to J1, right? And when J1 was getting hot, Jamal found him for isolation buckets and was like, hey, get him the ball. Let's all go back and play defense. He got that dude one-on-one. And it led to a couple different, left hook here, post move back to the right hand, which is great to see. He got back to the right hand. He beat his dude one-time baseline for a huge dunk on an isolation kind of play as well. And while those don't go into the stat book for Jamal as assists, those don't go into the stat book for Jamal as any of those kinds of things, it was him still dictating the game. He said, okay, they can't cover 13. Let's get the ball at 13, get out the way. And I know he also missed a lob to, I think the ball got intercepted, so it doesn't count as a shot attempt when he threw it to Xavier Francis, or the game before he threw a lob to Malik, or 2 games ago he threw a lob to Malik and then go down. And those highlight plays may be the more sexy assist that people are looking for. But finding the right guy at the right time of the game, much like those timely baskets, is incredibly important, and it's incredibly valuable, and it's what makes Houston one of the top teams in the country, and it's what makes Jamal the top guy on that team. The intuition for those things, that's super, super, super important. Now, in the third segment, I want to talk about this league we're in that we're going to see more of on Monday and Saturday. But first, it is not just basketball season. Much as I want to talk about it like it's just basketball season, because I love talking about college basketball, there's the NFL playoffs going on. And while the NFL playoffs are going on, Super Bowl is just a couple weeks away. And I'll say happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Now, if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about when you got a great seat on the couch, you got a great spread in front of you. I'm a weirdo with the Super Bowl. I am. I want to have Super Bowl food at my house. I want to sit there with my big TV. We've got a bigger TV now, send pictures on Twitter. And I want to sit there with no one bugging me, because here's the deal. I want to eat the good food. I want to enjoy the game. I want to enjoy the commercials. And I don't need people talking to me during it, because frankly, You talking to me during commercials means I missed those commercials. You talking to me during gameplay means I missed that action. I don't want to miss a thing. Now, if you're weird like me, let me know. But if you're weirder, if you're more into it than me, if you want to get more into the game, get more on it, go to FanDuel.com. I have all kinds of cool Super Bowl bets and picks and things happening right now. The Chiefs are currently, interestingly enough, we're recording this before the NFC game. The Chiefs are +3 against the Niners, -3.5 against the Lions. That's a weird stat line to go back and forth there before this happens. Now, by the time you're listening to this, you might know what happens on that one, but they have all kinds of other cool things to pick with the Super Bowl too. Go through and check out the catalog about who will score, how many points get scored, all national anthem times, all kinds of stuff at FanDuel.com. American #1 Sportsbook. Get $200 in bonus bets for your first $5 bet or more. Bet of $5 or more wins. Again, I'll say that one more time. You bet $5 or more and that bet wins. You can get $200 in bonus bets. If it's FanDuel.com/locked-on, sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook, a partner of the NFL. All right, so Jamal Shead is a veteran leader taking Houston through the Big 12 conference, and it's the best conference in college basketball. I would make an argument that the current iteration of the Big 12 is as good or better than any existing conference or any conference that's ever been in college basketball. I mean, we're looking at potentially getting 10 teams in the conference in the NCAA tournament, maybe even 11 teams out of the 14. That's higher percentages than anyone else has ever had. 70% was the most that's ever been done by the Big East. 10 out of 14 will be exactly that. If we got to 11, we're breaking that. Unbelievable level of basketball being played in this conference. And Houston's at the top after Saturday. Now, I know Houston's technically not the top. They have 2 losses, and Texas Tech has 1. It feels like a matter of time before Texas Tech gets that second. And Houston, for its worth, has beaten Texas Tech. And so that's, I guess, what I'm alluding to here. But it looks like after the weekend, Houston is as good as and can beat anybody in this conference. Because the conference favorites, I think, coming into the season was Kansas. Kansas lost to Iowa State by 4 over the weekend on Saturday. Now, Iowa State's a tough place to play. Ames, Iowa, we saw up close and personal. It's a very difficult place to get a win. But Kansas losing by 4 is notably the exact same margin that Houston lost in Iowa State by, right? Now, I understand that not everything is transitive, and basketball is more complicated than transitive property, but it's worth mentioning that that's exactly, frankly, how Houston did, right? Like, I think that that's a very comparable statistic going into it. We haven't seen Houston and Kansas play yet. We will on Saturday, but they did just as well in Ames, Iowa as Kansas did, and Kansas kind of having as similar kind of go with this conference as Houston has had, right? Oklahoma, who's been in the top 10 at points throughout the season, I think they were technically 11th on Saturday, lost to Texas Tech, a team that Houston beat, right? And so you see, again, another top-end team in this conference this year fall at home to Texas Tech, a team that came into Fertitta Center, and Houston, admittedly on the shoulders of a big Jamal Shead performance, kind of had their way with, right? TCU, a team that Houston lost to by 1 point on the road in Fort Worth, went into Waco and beat Baylor in their brand new stadium in Waco, right? Now, it was a last-second shot, high-scoring game. I get the excitement of it. Anything happens on a random Saturday in college basketball. But if you're Houston, you got to see both of those results as positives, right? Because in both of those instances, you see teams that you've competed with and kind of understand how you feel about yourself relative to taking care of top 10 talent in the Big 12. You're going to feel pretty good about your chances when you run into Oklahoma at the end of the season, when you run into Baylor in a couple weeks. You got to feel pretty good about what you're doing, right? Because you're seeing the direct comparison, the teams that you feel you understand how you stack up against, going out and doing it as well. Monday night's opponent, Texas. UT, I think, has had I'd argue, rough season, or certainly rougher than we all thought they were going to have. They were a top 25 team for much of the start of the year. They've fallen out of that. Rodney Terry has cared a lot more about people throwing horns down than he has about what's going on in basketball floor, it looks like. And they've had a rough season so far relative to expectations. I guess if they weren't the bajillion-dollar athletic program, they might not have those high expectations. They might not be calling this a rough season, but they are, and they do, right? They lost in Provo on Saturday in a way that, frankly, would have been embarrassing. Like, Houston did not ever look like they're ever going to have that happen to them in Provo on Saturday, right? When they went up to BYU earlier. Now, I know, again, I talk about sports or not the transitive property in mathematics, right? Like, Texas losing to BYU does not mean, and Houston beating BYU does not necessarily mean directly you're going to beat that. That's never how it exactly works out. But it was interesting to see BYU be not bothered by a lot of the things Texas does defensively after having just seen them be so bothered by so many of the things Houston does defensively. I think that it's safe to say that those things make me lean Houston in that matchup Monday night. Now, here's the fun part about this. This feels like it's also being kind of hyped up to be UT Austin's Super Bowl of sorts. They've got a seating chart being tweeted out everywhere and pushed out everywhere about who wears what colored T-shirts across the gym. I'll tell you right now, we need to get some red shirts in that gym. I also think it's interesting to say that, like, Kansas was a preseason favorite, and Baylor was a preseason, can they win the Big 12 as a dark horse? And Texas got the Elite Eight last year and wanted to tell everyone that they got screwed on this, then the other thing because of Dessou's foot or whatever. To see all those teams get kind of put to the same level as Houston all of a sudden. Before conference play, it was Houston hadn't played anyone in conference play. Give it some time. Houston drops 2 games by a total of 5 points in conference play. It's like, see, they're not ready for the same conference as everybody else. Blah, 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 blah. And now we're seeing everybody else suffer much worse, if not at least I guess technically Kansas in this instance was the exact same. Houston beat UCF, Kansas did not, but I digress. I have to say that watching other Big 12 basketball only makes me more confident in Houston going through the Big 12 trek. Now, I don't mean to say Monday night in Austin will not be a challenge. I'm sure the Moody Center, it's a giant new stadium. I say it's 2 years old. 2 years old. 2 years old. I'm sure that'll be fairly challenging. I'm sure that'll be fairly difficult. But I'm liking my chances. I really am. Now, there will be another episode out today because it's a Monday after a Big 12 game. Getting ready for that big Monday matchup with UT Austin. UT Austin has some talent on the roster and has had an up and down season. Imagine that. I want to look a little bit at that roster and all those kind of things in a second episode today. So make sure you check your feed and go check out that episode as well. If you started there and ended up here, we appreciate you making us your first and second listen of the day. If you're starting here and going there next, we appreciate you making us your first and second listen of the day, because Locked On Cougs is a proud Locked On podcast network. That means your team, our Cougs, every day. Go Cougs.